So let's turn to the book of Samuel then. And all of us will remember, I'm sure, that the book of Samuel originally would have contained what you and I are familiar with in terms of 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel. So originally then, and still in the Hebrew Bible, it's one book. And the division into 2 books happened with the translation of the Old Testament into Greek, the Septuagint. So it's one book, and it belongs to a set of 3. So there's Samuel, then you have the book of Kings, which again we've got into 2 parts, but it was originally 1, and then Chronicles, which again 1 book originally, which we have divided into 2. Okay, so Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles belong together. And what we have in these 3 books is the history of the monarchy. So with Samuel, you have how the monarchy was set up. And then in Kings, you have how the monarchy develops and declines. And then in Chronicles, you have a review of everything, starting with Adam, right the way through to the monarchy and how the monarchy declines. That's the book of Chronicles. But we're going to take them in turn. So let's begin then with Samuel. And Samuel has a simple structure. And we tend to think of the book now as falling into 3 parts. So you have the introduction, which is chapters 1 and 2 of what we call 1 Samuel. Then you have the book of Samuel itself, the story of Samuel, chapters 3 to 7, 3 to 7. And then in 1 Samuel and chapter 8, right through to the end of 2 Samuel, you have the book of the Kings. Okay, so very simple layout. The introduction, then you have the book of Samuel, and then you have the book of the Kings. So nothing too complicated there. What I want to focus on particularly is the introduction, because chapters 1 and 2 form the introduction to Samuel, to Kings, and to Chronicles. So really, what you have in the first 2 chapters of Samuel lays out for us all that we need to expect and what we need to look out for in the 3 books as a whole. So the first 2 chapters then, we have in chapter 1 the family of interest, and that's the family of Elkanah. And what we have with him is his wife Hannah, and we have echoes in this story of the story of Jacob and his wives. So do you remember now, you look out for repetition, themes that you've come across before? Well, this book opens with similar themes. It's the themes of barrenness, and it's the themes of mockery because of barrenness. And of course, as you know, Hannah is barren, the wife of Elkanah. So let's just look at the opening verses then of chapter 1. Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim of the mountains of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Jeroham, the son of Elihu, the son of Tohu, and so on. Now he had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Now, so straight away then, you're beginning to make links with what has gone before. This man went up from his city every year to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Now, I said that these 2 chapters are going to introduce to you all the themes that you need to be aware of. And you've just been given one. And the clue there is in verse 3, when Elkanah goes up every year to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts. Here's a new name for God, the Lord of hosts. And this name is going to be hugely significant throughout these three books, Samuel, Kings, Chronicles, and we're going to see it even in Hannah and her experience. So there's your kind of theme straight away told you. Also, the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. So Shiloh is a very important location. Whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, and to all her sons and daughters, but to Hannah he would give a double portion. Now again, that should be very familiar to us in what's gone on before. He loved Hannah, although the Lord had closed her womb. Verse 6, her rival also provoked her severely to make her miserable, because the Lord had closed her womb. You've got repetition of the phrase there. It is the Lord who has closed her womb. So again, look back to previous examples, right back to Abraham and then Isaac and so on, about barrenness and about favoritism, having a favorite wife because of her barrenness. As the chapter progresses, then you have Hannah going to pray, make a vow, how she's thought to be drunk by this man who's acting as the priest, if you like, by Eli. Verse 13, he sees her praying, and then Eli thinks that she was drunk. But she's praying in great distress, as you know, praying about her barrenness, and she is then promised a son, that she would be pregnant. And then you get the most important bit, and that's in chapter 2. And this is not just important for Samuel. As I said earlier, it's important for Samuel, for Kings, and for Chronicles. And that is Hannah's song. Chapter 2, verses 1 through to 10, you've got Hannah's song. Now, this song is going to look backwards and it's going to look forwards, but it also contains the three main themes that are going to be developed in these three books that we are focusing on. So I want to draw out those three themes, and then we'll think of examples of those themes as we look at Samuel. So hugely important then, okay? Hannah's song looks back to Miriam's song. It looks back to Deborah's song. And as you know, I'm sure, Hannah's song is also going to look forward to Mary and her song that you'll find in Luke's Gospel. So she is very much one of the women who feature in our Bibles, women of special significance and importance in terms of the whole build-up to the Lord Jesus Christ and his coming into the world. Before we look at the song then, I just want to say that this song opens the books of Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles, but the book of Samuel itself will also close with a song, and that's known as David's song. So if you turn to the end of 2 Samuel, you then have David's song, and David's song is in chapter 22. Okay, so just take a look for a moment at David's song then in 2 Samuel and chapter 2. Then David spoke to the Lord the words of this song on the day when the Lord had delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. And he said, "The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer, the God of my strength, in whom I will trust, my shield and the horn of my salvation." Now that song, David's song, is going to do the opposite in one sense of Hannah's. Hannah's song will look forward, and David's song will look back. And the reason why the Greek version of the Old Testament separates out these three books is because David's song seems to bring things to an end. There's a couple of chapters left, no doubt, but they decided, okay, let's break the book here, and then we'll go into the book of Kings later on. Okay, so a song that looks forward and a song that looks backwards. Let's turn then to Hannah's song in chapter 2. And we'll just read the song. And as we do so, remember all those skills now. Look out for repetition and all the rest of it, and see what we make of Hannah's song. Okay? So Hannah prayed and said, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. I smile at my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation. No one is holy like the Lord, for there is none besides you, nor is there any rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let no arrogance come from your mouth." Now she's obviously thinking about her fellow wife, isn't she? "For the Lord is the God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty men are broken, and those who stumble are girded with strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, and the hungry have ceased to hunger. Even the barren has borne 7, and she who has many children has become feeble. The Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and brings up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and lifts up. He raises the poor from the dust, and he lifts the beggar from the ash heap, to set them among princes and make them inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and he has set the world upon them. He will guard the feet of his saints, but the wicked shall be silent in darkness. For by strength no man shall prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken in pieces. From heaven he will thunder against them. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed." Very well-known song. I want to divide that up into 3. And what you see in these 3 sections of the song are the 3 themes that these books are going to develop. So you have rejoicing, verses 1 and 2. Then you have the first section, verses 3 to 5. And the theme of verses 3 to 5 is the sovereignty of God. The Lord is the God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The sovereignty of God. Then verses 6 down to really down to 10, or perhaps the middle bit of 10, are the most important theme in the book. I'll talk to you about that in a second. And then the final bit of the song is just 2 lines, and that's in verse 10. He gives strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. And of course, the theme there is the theme of monarchy, the theme of kingship. Okay, Hannah is seeing that the Lord is going to establish a king, and that he's going to cause the king to prosper, that his chosen one is going to be exalted by God. So Hannah is looking forward to the time of the monarchy. So you've got the sovereignty of God, you've got the monarchy. For the second theme, let's take a look at the middle part of the song, and I'm sure you can work out what the theme is. So look at verses 6, 7, and 8 particularly. The Lord kills and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and brings up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and lifts up. He raises the poor from the dust, and he lifts the beggar from the ash heap. Now, do you see what the theme is? You get it in all of those verses, but you get repetition, and the repetition is really giving a strong clue about the theme. So if you look at those verses again, verse 6, he brings down and he brings up. Verse 7, he brings low and he lifts up. So the second theme is down and up and up and down. The Lord will take those who are down and lift them up. and the Lord will bring those who are up, and he will bring them down. And that movement of up and down is central to this book and the other two. So if we think of that for a few minutes, then you have God bringing those who are up down. So you're going to see that with Eli. He is acting as the judge at this point, and he is going to literally, do you remember, fall down off his seat when he hears the news of the capture of the ark, and his sons are going to be destroyed. Samuel's sons, they're going to be brought down, and then, of course, God will take Saul and lift him up to the place of kingship, but then the Lord will then bring Saul down from kingship and bring him down to nothing, and bring his family to an end. So there's up and down. You get Saul in his last desperate moments when he's seeking guidance from Samuel, and Samuel has died. Saul will bring up the spirit of Samuel from the grave, and so you get that very dramatic, very mysterious passage where Samuel is seen rising up from the grave, from Sheol, to give word to Saul about his defeat. You got down moving to up, and then of course the ultimate down to up is going to be seen in the experience of David. He is from a lowly tribe. He's the least of them all, and then he's going to be taken by God, and he's going to be brought up to the place of kingship, and he'll be brought up to a place where he will have a covenant established with him. So you've got down and up and up and down. And just for the sake of completeness, if you turn to Luke's Gospel, and you have Mary's song. If you take a look at Mary's song, you have the same ideas of down and up and that's no coincidence at all. So turn to Luke's Gospel and the very first chapter, and you'll see it straight away, won't you? Verse 48, the Lord has regarded the lowly state of his maidservant. So there's the down idea. And as you go through then, verse 52, he has put down the mighty from their throne, and he has exalted the lowly. Down and up carries on as a theme into the Song of Mary. So 3 themes then. You've got the sovereignty of God, you've got the whole idea of down and up and down, and then you've got finally the idea of kingship. Let's take the notion of the sovereignty of God. He is the Lord of hosts. We've just met that phrase in chapter 1. They went up to worship to the Lord of hosts. Okay, this title for God emphasizes his power, his sovereignty, his glory, his majesty. It emphasizes the activity of God every day in the affairs of men and women. God is working first, and he's working his purposes out in the affairs of men and women. And I just want to give you 2 examples of this, and I'm sure you can find plenty of examples for yourselves. But it's the idea of how God moves first. And when God moves first, human beings then respond. Human beings work out what God has first done. So let me show you the 2 examples that I've got in mind. So in chapter 2 of 1 Samuel, take a look at verse 25. Okay, 1 Samuel 2 and verse 25. This is when Eli and his 2 sons are getting to know the judgment that God will bring on them. Verse 25. If a man sins against another, God will judge him. But if a man sins against the Lord, who will intercede for him? This is the warning now given to Eli's sons. Nevertheless, they did not heed the voice of their father, because the Lord desired to kill them. Now, that's a very troubling verse, but the primary idea of that verse is that God has decided first what he wishes to do, and then Eli's sons are going to react, they're going to behave in a way that flows out of what God has already decided. God is the first mover. God is the primary one who initiates, who begins, and then human beings just work that out. Okay, so it's a troubling thought, but here is God's purposes, and his purposes will stand, and then human beings flow from it. That's your first example. Look at a second example towards the end of the book of Samuel. So 2 Samuel, and it's chapter 24. And it's the very famous occasion when David takes a census of Israel. And he wants to see how prosperous the nation is, and he numbers them all. And you get in this chapter the very first verse, okay? Again, the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, "Go number Israel and Judah." So do you see the same idea now in this verse? God moved David against them. So God is at work in the mind and the heart of David. The result is David suggests a census, or David numbers the Israelites and the people of Judah, and God then judges him. Remember, he gives him 3 options to choose from. The worst option is the 3 worst options, I guess, and David chooses one. But the purpose of that first verse is you have the idea of the sovereignty of God, that God wishes to do something, that God has a purpose, that God is working out his plan. That comes first. And then human beings, sinful human beings, believing human beings, David, Eli, we all work out what God has beforehand determined and decided. And that's this idea of the sovereignty of God, the sovereign purpose of God, the Lord of hosts doing what he purposes to do and fulfilling that through human action. Okay, that's the sovereignty of God. Now, those are 2 examples, one from the beginning of the book, one from the end. But if you make your way through Samuel, you'll see examples again and again and again of God being the prime mover, the first mover, the initiator of all things that then come about and come to pass in human experience. The sovereignty of God, we've looked at up and down. Last thing to do then is to look at the idea of monarchy and the idea of kinship, okay, kingship. So Hannah has seen this in her song, in the final lines of verse 10 of her song. And then what you have in the book of Samuel are 3 false starts, okay? You have the false start of Eli, you have the false start of Samuel, and you have the false start of Saul. Only Saul is given the official title of king, but Eli and Samuel both function as, perhaps you could say, wannabe kings, because they both set up their sons to follow after them. So Eli tries to start a dynasty with his sons. Samuel does exactly the same with his. He tries to set up a dynasty through his. Both Eli's sons and Samuel's sons are wicked and evil in the sight of God, so they are judged. And then, of course, you get the actual story of Saul, the first, or is it? If we think back to the book of Judges and Abimelech. But staying within the confines of Samuel now, Saul becomes the first king. So let's take a look then at Eli, first of all. And chapter 2 and verse 12, the sons of Eli were corrupt, They did not know the Lord. And then the whole idea of chapter 2 is how Eli is seeking to have his sons follow his example, but God's judgment falls upon them. In chapters 3 to 7, you got the story of Samuel. And we know this story very well. You have him from a boy through to a judge. And you see how, for the first time, for a long time, it's through Samuel that the word of the Lord is heard again in the land of Israel. And as you look down through chapter 3, you'll see the emphasis on the word of the Lord being established again in the land of Israel. But you get the calamity in chapter 4 of the capture of the ark. And the death of Eli, the glory has departed, the Philistines now have the ark. You get that story of how disaster falls on the Philistines because they have the ark of God with them. And then you have the gradual return of the ark through back through to Israel, and Samuel acting as judge. Chapters 3 through to chapter 7. And then chapter 8, you've got the book of the Kings. Okay, so just take a look at the opening verses of chapter 8. Now it came to pass, when Samuel was old, that he made his sons judges over Israel. Now just see the idea of he's trying to set up a dynasty, okay? He has put his sons in positions of leadership to follow him after his death. Now, judges don't work like that. We saw that in the book of Judges. It is God who raises up a judge, not the judge putting his sons in a line of succession. So Samuel, for all that he has done, here he is now seeking to establish a dynasty. So we get the name of his firstborn son in chapter 8, verse 2, and then verse 3, but the sons did not walk in his ways, they turned aside after dishonest gain. And it's the example of these sons that leads the people of Israel to start clamoring for a king. So straight away you can see in verse 5 of chapter 8, look, you are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations. This thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. Now, I want to leave you with a couple of things to ponder. And here's the first thing. Why was Samuel displeased? Was he displeased for the honor and glory of God? Or was he displeased because his own plans to set his own sons up were being rejected by the people of Israel? Okay, so ponder on that. But whatever he does, he turns to the Lord in verse 6, and then the Lord speaks to him. And these are incredibly important words. And this is the second thing I want us to ponder. When he turns to the Lord, verse 7 of chapter 8, the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me, that I should not reign over them. As you think of that for a moment then, do you remember how the book of Judges ends? There was no king in the land, and everybody did what was right in their own eyes. The book of Judges sets us up with the expectation of monarchy. If Judges is preparing us for monarchy, why then, when monarchy is being demanded by the people, why does God seem to be against the idea? Okay, so I want you just to reflect on that. But nonetheless, they go ahead, and in the rest of chapter 8, you get Samuel telling us how awful the idea of kingship is. And just take a look down the verses, 11, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. There is one word that's repeated again and again and again as Samuel warns the people about a king, and it's the word take. The king will take from you. He'll take your children, your sons, your daughters, your possessions, your animals. He'll take your liberties. He'll take you for armies. And here is Samuel doing all that he can to dissuade the Israelites, even though it seems in the purposes of God, a monarch is that which he wants for his people. Nonetheless, the people want to have a king. They don't listen. And so Saul is chosen as king. And the rest of what we call 1 Samuel is the story of Saul and Saul's establishment as king, Saul's rejection by God from being king, and then Saul's death at the end of 1 Samuel. I leave you with the story of Saul. We know it well. Its ins and outs. It's tragedy. And just as a sort of a side thought, if there's such a thing, Saul is an example of a biblical tragic figure. And there's a number of tragic figures in our Bibles. And Saul sets out for us what a tragic figure looks like. And so it may be worth thinking about what a tragic figure, and it's a formal designation now, what tragedy looks like in our Bibles. But Saul is a tragic figure. Then we have 2 Samuel, which is the story of David and all that happens to David. And 2 Samuel ends with the death of David. But no, it doesn't. It ends with the imminent death of David, if you like. And then 1 Kings is going to lead us through David's death and into the establishment of Solomon as king. Okay? So last thing then, turn back to 1 Samuel. And we were looking at that chapter 7, when Samuel is judging Israel. And of course, you've got one of the most famous words that Samuel ever speaks, where he's at. And it's in verse 12 of 1 Samuel 7. It's a good place to end today. 1 Samuel 7 and verse 12. Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Shen and called the name Ebenezer, saying, "Thus far has the Lord helped us." And that statement of Ebenezer is a further reflection on the sovereignty of God, that God is the one who leads, the one who sets people up, who brings his people to certain points, even if that certain point, remember Ebenezer prior to this was a place of failure. In here now, in Samuel's words and in Samuel's experience, Ebenezer becomes a place that demonstrates the faithfulness and the covenantal blessing and promise of God. So there is the book of